On this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, we are talking about Memphis dropping their 9th consecutive game. Yes, you heard that right. The record losing streak under the Taylor Jenkins and Zach Kleiman regime grows to 9 games. We're going to talk about that, plus how one Memphis Grizzly in particular is continuing to show his value and some of the things that we can take away during this difficult time following this team in this lost season. Lock in with me on a Tuesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Losses don't get easier as seasons grind forth, and as they pile up, they still can hurt a little bit more than I even let on as someone who has tankathon.com bookmarked and all of those sorts of things. Don't get me wrong, as someone that's followed this team for so long, over a decade now, it's still tough to see them drop games, even when that's the likeliest outcome given the current circumstances. I am your host for this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, Joe Mullinax. No to Michael Cole. Day after a game, he's doing his beat writer thing. Usually in those situations, it'll be myself or him solo, and that's exactly the case. He'll be back with me for our Wednesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. But here we are, living in a moment where the Grizzlies are among the worst teams in the NBA, and they're earning that title at the moment, given their record, especially over the last 9 contests. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. As proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts. You can also check us out on YouTube. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, all those fun things. Continue to make Michael, myself, both of us here at Locked On Grizzlies part of your daily NBA and Memphis Grizzlies consumption. Lots of fun things to discuss. Lots of reasons to be positive and optimistic, even in the darkness that is a 9-game losing streak. We'll talk more about that later on in the show. But first off, we need to discuss the obvious, and that's the Memphis Grizzlies are not particularly good at this time. The New Orleans Pelicans come into FedEx Forum, hand the Grizzlies their 20th home loss of the season, 2-0. Who would have thunk that the Memphis Grizzlies would have 20 home losses at this point in the campaign? Certainly not me. Even with the John Morant suspension, the Memphis Grizzlies are one of the 2 best teams in the NBA. And it's just unbelievable to me that even with all that's transpired, all that's occurred for Memphis, for them to be in a position now where they are one of the very worst home record teams in the National Basketball Association. That is a drastic turn for them. Obviously, things didn't go the way that Memphis wanted them to, especially in a fourth quarter, which had to be one of the lowest scoring fourth quarters, if not the lowest scoring fourth quarter in the NBA this season. Only 24 points combined scored between the Pelicans and the Grizzlies in this 96-87 game. It's one of those finals that if you follow the grit and grind Grizzlies like I did back in the day about a decade ago, you saw that score and it wasn't that surprising. It's pretty surprising in the modern NBA, and it's pretty surprising when, again, 10 points for the Pelicans in the final frame of the game, 14 points for Memphis. New Orleans wins this contest only shooting 41% from the field. The Grizzlies shot 42%. The Pelicans shot much better from 3. Memphis chucked 44 three-pointers in this game, only converting 12 of them. And one of the reasons that they have to shoot that many threes, a third of which made by Luke Kennard, who we'll talk more about later on in the show. Hopefully my good buddy and pal to Michael Cole is listening, Mr. Steven Adams. I'm going to make a case for Luke Kennard and his elite skill set, still belonging on the Grizzlies. A third of those threes were made by Memphis. Here is why they have to shoot so many of those, because the Grizzlies simply do not have guys that can create off the dribble for themselves right now. No Ja Morant, no Desmond Bane, no Marcus Smart, no Derrick Rose. Who is the primary creator of offense in a starting five that includes Jackson Jr., Aldama, John Conchar, who only played 15 minutes? For all my John Conchar frustrations, hopefully he didn't get hurt, and it was just Coach Jenkins realizing that John Conchar shouldn't have been playing. But I digress. Vince Williams Jr. and Scottie Pippen Jr. Of those five names, who's your creator of offense? Scottie Pippen Jr., I suppose, but he literally is on a contract that he wasn't on with the Grizzlies a couple of weeks ago. He's still new to the team. So while he had 6 assists and no turnovers, that's a bright spot. If that's the guy that you're primarily counting on, again, Jaren had 4 turnovers, you can't realistically expect this team to do much more than chuck threes if the defensive focus, as it was for the Pelicans, was to make Jaren's life difficult. 22 points for Jaren, but on 19 shots. Wasn't his most efficient game from beyond the arc. If you're going to collapse the paint, a lot of drop coverage was played by the Pelicans in this contest. You got to take shots from outside, and that leads to things like 2 for 8 shooting opportunities for Santi Aldama, who continues his poor run. Every once in a while, he has a flash of offense, and that's good to see because the Grizzlies are going to need him if he's going to stick around for his offensive acumen. You see another tough game for him. You see Yuta Watanabe, who is a fun story, don't get me wrong, and he was 4 for 5 on his 2-pointers. Nice cut to the basket for an assist from Vince Williams Jr., a nice highlight in a dark, dreary basketball game for Memphis. But Yuta was 1 for 7 from 3. You definitely need more from him in that situation. Vince had a tough shooting night as well, 1 for 5 from beyond the arc. So the Grizzlies shoot poorly. They don't have the ability to get to the basket, and New Orleans takes advantage of it, even in a bad offensive game for them. New Orleans is up by 14, I believe, at the half and didn't really look back, nor should they have looked back. But the reality for this Grizzlies team right now is they simply, if their defense doesn't consistently lock down guys, and they did some good things in this game, but Brandon Ingram went off, Herb Jones, the noted, let's leave him open and see if he makes them. Well, he made them, right? In 35 minutes of play, he shot 3 for 6, 50% from beyond the arc. Brandon Ingram had a solid offensive game. The Pelicans bench did some good things. The Grizzlies just don't have the numbers. They don't have an NBA rotation right now. Lamar Stevens scoring 10 points off the bench. That's cool. That's a good story. 7 rebounds, 2 blocks. He's probably not on this Grizzlies team long term. Same thing with Yuta Watanabe. It's fun to watch him out there in this lost season. But the reality is watching those guys play is a reminder that this team is broken right now. They are broken. And it doesn't get much more broken than a 9-game losing streak. Obviously, the streak can continue. And if they keep playing this way, they almost certainly will continue. But the painful truth is that the Grizzlies, as currently constructed, are not going to win very many games. Jaren Jackson Jr. is a number 1 option. That's not the ideal role for him. Vince Williams Jr. leading the team in minutes at 37. That's not an ideal role for him. Even if you want to argue that Vince Williams Jr. should be a starter when everybody's back and healthy next season. You want to make that argument, I'll listen to it. I don't know that I agree, but I'll certainly listen. He's earned that through his play this year. Vince being a member of the Rising Stars Challenge now. We'll talk more about that later on in the show. So the Grizzlies will be represented in All-Star Weekend coming up after all. Vince Williams Jr. earned that, and he's earned the opportunity in the contract and all those things with Memphis. But even if he is a starter next year, he shouldn't have 37 minutes logged. That's not reality. That's not good basketball. Lamar Stevens, Yuta Watanabe, Trey Jemison, all of those guys, there's an outside chance none of them are on the active roster for Memphis this time next year. This team's going to look very different than it does right now. Luke Kennard, the only realistic bench option for Memphis at this time. So 9 games losing, it sucks. You want to win as a fan. I'm sure the players and coaches obviously want to, but perspective is key. They fought, they defended, they made the game close. They fought back from 25 points down to make it a contest late. They just ran out of gas. And that's exactly what's going to keep happening because they do not have enough in the tank to compete with a team like New Orleans, even on an off night for them, which it was offensively. Noted Grizz killer CJ McCollum, shooting as poorly as he did against Memphis, 4 for 15 from beyond the, 4 for 15 from the field. That's not going to happen again, right? McCollum is a lot better against Memphis usually than that. So DeMichael and I kind of predicted that New Orleans was going to have that game circled. It wasn't a dominant win because the Grizzlies fought back in the second half, like I mentioned, but it was a win nonetheless for the Pelicans, and the Grizzlies dropped their 9th consecutive game. There was a positive, though, and it was the continued productivity of Luke Kennard continuing to have an elite skill that the Memphis Grizzlies will desperately need going into next season. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Prize Picks. Ooh, it's demon time over on Prize Picks. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. Demons and goblins are the newest and most exciting way to play at Prize Picks. Squares marked with red demons or green goblins get you different payouts. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 3 million members. The easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's you against the numbers, and the winnings can keep rolling in. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're talking Luke Kennard and his value to this team both now and moving forward. Stick around. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I'm Joe Mullinax, flying solo on this episode of the show. No DeMichael Cole. He is the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer, of course, for the Commercial Appeal. I am a former writer myself. I've been with Locked On Grizzlies for a while now, been covering this team over a decade. Very excited to be with you each and every time I'm able here on Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you so much for choosing to spend part of your day with me. A tough loss for Memphis. Not going to try to make it seem like it was anything other than that. But even on the darkest and dreariest day, as I mentioned earlier, there are rays of sunshine. And Luke Kennard was a ray of sunshine in this contest. And DeMichael and I have talked about Luke Kennard on this show. And DeMichael has been, I don't want to say critical because I think he likes Luke Kennard, but he has kind of alluded to the idea, and he wrote about this over the Commercial Appeal, that he felt that it should have been Kennard who was traded and not Steven Adams. And he thinks Memphis is going to struggle finding a replacement for Adams. Now, that particular piece of this may very well be true. And it's important to understand that the concerns about Luke Kennard that DeMichael has are valid. Watch him go against bigger physical teams. Watch him go against the Lakers. Watch him play in the playoffs where the defensive energy really ramps up. Go back to that Lakers series. He had trouble at times getting open because he does not have that elite athleticism, the ability to come off a screen, that really rapid fire release. He is not that kind of three-point shooter. But you know what kind of three-point shooter he is? The kind that for 3 seasons straight has shot at least 43% from beyond the arc. At least 43% for 3 consecutive seasons. He is the kind of three-point shooter that is shooting a 3rd best in the history of the National Basketball Association three-point percentage for his career. That's not hyperbole. You can look it up. Basketball Reference, wherever you get your basketball stats, it's there. 3rd best percentage in NBA history. Now, does that make him better than Steph Curry? Of course not. Does that make him better than Klay Thompson? No, it doesn't. Does it make him extremely valuable to this Memphis Grizzlies team? You better believe it. Because what he provides better than anybody else that Memphis can realistically acquire is spacing. Good friend of mine, Parker Fleming, he would call it gravity, right? And that always kind of annoyed me. It bugged me. That's one of my old man basketball things. Get off my lawn with your gravity. The attention of the defense has to be paid to Luke Kennard. You can't just shy away from him because he can make you pay from a variety of spots on the perimeter with his shot. And that allows for a guy, when the team is healthy, like John Morant, like Desmond Bane, who's grown as a creator off the dribble, like a Marcus Smart. Heck, even a Derrick Rose, all 4 of those guys not active against the Pelicans. They have more room to work with because you cannot get overhelped off of when Luke Kennard is on the floor. And I mentioned this idea of athletic defensive wings, right? And I think that's a fair point that DeMichael makes. But against the New Orleans Pelicans, who have some athletic, long defensive wings, not as successful in this particular contest. And again, for all the Grizzlies' three-point shooting woes in this game, imagine if Luke Kennard wasn't on the floor. Memphis shot 12 of 44 from beyond the arc. Luke Kennard was 4 for 9. 4 for 9, almost 50% from three. Again, right in line with that 43-ish%. Pretty consistent. Without Luke Kennard, where would this team be? They would not be capable of shooting the three ball in any way, shape, or form, anywhere near what they're going to need moving forward. And how do you replace that? If it was so easy to replace three-point shooting, how come the Grizzlies for 10 years have been trying to find it? How come during the grit and grind era and all the moves that were made and all the hopes and dreams of trying to fill that void, nobody was able to fully manage to do so? Why not? Because it's not as simple as you think. Even in this era of NBA basketball, finding a guy that can fill it up from range, not that simple to do. Now, again, that doesn't mean that finding a guy who's really good at being big, like Steven Adams, doesn't mean that's going to happen overnight either. But that's assuming that Steven Adams, after almost 18 months of not playing basketball competitively, is going to be able to do those things the way that he used to do them. Or that's assuming that Steven Adams wants to do them in Memphis, or wanted to do them in Memphis, or that Memphis wanted him to do those things for them. That's a lot of assuming. And you know what they say about assuming, dear listener and dear viewer. I'm not going to say it because it's a family show. But you catch the drift. If Steven Adams wasn't longed for this Grizzlies life, it's best to move on now. And now, if you want to move on from Luke Kennard, I understand. They're not going to do it, of course, this season because the trade deadline is come and gone. Kennard's here to stay for now. But if Memphis somehow can get in on a nice, big, fat, superstar type deal, sure. As long as the money's right, you can use Kennard's salary. It's a nice piece going into next season. Team option for basically the whole kit and caboodle, all $14 or so million. So that's helpful. But his ability to shoot threes is also very helpful. And that is going to be necessary. It's going to be something that Memphis, if they're smart, is going to look into extending with Luke Kennard. He's not a defensive dynamo. He's a tryhard. DeMichael says that. I think that's a fair way to put it. But he shoots the basketball at an elite clip. And he did so in a game where he did not have a ton of help. He didn't have someone to create those shots for him as easily as he would if the first, second, or even third string point guards were active for the contest. And yet he was still able to get his shots off. He was still able to convert. That is a major positive. That is something to be excited about watching this team moving forward because his productivity is a layer and a connector. It's a bridge to next season. You can envision him being open in the corner off of a drive, Ja Morant drive. Or you can envision somebody sticking him and not being able to help in a pick and roll set and allowing for Ja the room and space to manipulate, create a shot for someone else, or get his own bucket. It's easy to say that you can remanufacture that in other ways, but the surest fire way to make that space a reality is through having elite three-point shooting. And the Grizzlies are bad at that. They got one guy that's good at it right now consistently. Even Desmond Bane's having a down season shooting. Doesn't mean he's a bad shooter, but it's not his best year. The best three-point shooter on the Memphis Grizzlies is Luke Kennard, and you can have him on the team next year. To have that skill set, that was worth it for me personally to ship out Steven Adams. But what say you? Maybe you disagree with me. Maybe you're team DeMichael on this take and you think Steven Adams should still be in Memphis. I am of the mindset that they can try to replicate what Adams brought, especially as a rebounder in the aggregate, as a screener, as a creator of offense in that way. That's a much more difficult task. And we can talk more about that on an upcoming episode of Locked On Grizzlies. He was an excellent rebounder. I'm not trying to say he wasn't. I think there's other pieces that you can find that can replicate that more easily than the elite shooting that Kennard brings. What say you? let us know in the comments below. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to close out the show. Again, looking for reasons to be optimistic. Losing streaks are no fun. Having to talk yourself into Luke Kennard being a key part of this franchise moving forward. You got to remember he was kind of on the end of the bench for the Clippers when he arrived around this time last year. It's difficult right now, but there's a sunny side. There's a bright side to all this, and we'll talk about that coming up next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, I want to remind you of Locked On Sports Today, first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube that you can now also find on Amazon Fire TV. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top stories of the day in sports with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find the Locked On Sports Today channel now on Amazon Fire TV. I think that's pretty cool, personally. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by BetterHelp. And again, I'm guilty of taking sports too seriously. If you're checking out this podcast, chances are a time or two, you're in the same boat as me. We sometimes all need the chance to get stuff off our chest. And I'm going to take that opportunity now to really kind of drive home how difficult it can be to lose. You feel like it's your fault somehow as a fan even, but especially if you're a player or a coach, how you're connected to the failure, you kind of internalize it. You don't want to share that pain. And while it's just a game, it's just sports, when it's something that you're so passionate about, it can certainly drag you down more than you let on. Therapy can be different for everyone. Obviously, lots of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports team, and it's important to get things like that off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Coming back here on Locked On Grizzlies, discussing the sunny side of the current state of things. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, closing out this episode of the show, looking for the bright side in the midst of a 9-game losing streak. Not the easiest thing to do. Flying solo makes it a little bit harder as well. I missed DeMichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. But DeMichael will be back with us on our Wednesday edition. And you've been so kind as to give some of your day to me, spending it with me, talking Memphis Grizzlies basketball. And I truly do appreciate it each and every time you do so. Hopefully you're an everydayer at this point, and you do it every time a new episode drops on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Luke Kennard is a reason to be optimistic. Another reason to be optimistic in these dark days is the discipline for G.G. Jackson that led to him not participating in the game on Monday night. Now, hopefully you're sitting there listening, viewing, whatever the case might be, Freudian slip, whatever the case might be, dear listener, dear viewer, and you're thinking to yourself, wait a second, is this idiot trying to tell me that G.G. Jackson getting in trouble with the team for violating a team rule is a good thing? Yes, because now is a time for learning lessons. And it's a heck of a lot easier to learn those lessons in a season that realistically you cannot expect anything more than the current state of play. Competitiveness, flawed execution, losses. Those are going to be the expectations for the next 2 months. Doesn't make it fun. Doesn't make it something to be overly excited about, but it does mean that you can take advantage of this time and learn and grow. We see it with Jaren Jackson Jr. almost every game. He is passing and completing assists more than he has at any point in his career. And that's extremely valuable. That is a skill set that I promise you, as long as everybody stays healthy, knock on wood, this team set is going to benefit this team is going to benefit immensely from that skill set developing moving forward. Once Ja Morant is back on the floor, and Desmond Bane is back on the floor, and Marcus Smart is back on the floor, another guy that can create offense for others, even if it's on a 10 to 11% clip, that's still better than 4 or 5%. And those points can be the difference in winning and losing close basketball games against good teams. That's a reason to be optimistic. Vince Williams, continued opportunity, the opportunity for playing time, the opportunity for a starting role, the opportunity to show that he's worthy of a full-blown NBA contract. And now, with Dyson Daniels of the New Orleans Pelicans out with injury, Vince Williams Jr. as an injury replacement gets to show the NBA as a member of the Rising Stars Challenge, gets to show the NBA universe what he's capable of and the good work that he's done in Memphis this season. We were going into this All-Star weekend I was going to do some research for an episode coming up later this week. I can't remember the last time the Grizzlies didn't have an all-star game representative. Even if it's rising stars or three-point shootout or whatever the case might be, they usually had something. But until Vince Williams Jr. was added to the Rising Stars Challenge, it was going to be a pretty easy weekend for myself and DeMichael. Almost a week-long break, basically. Still do a show here or there, but wasn't going to have a ton to talk about. Now we have Vince Williams Jr. as a rising star to discuss later on this week here on Locked On Grizzlies. In a lost season, you will see opportunities for guys like G.G. Jackson to learn and grow both on and off the floor, for guys like Vince Williams Jr. to show they belong. And those are going to continue to happen. Lamar Stevens looked good at times against the Pelicans, and maybe that won't translate to a full-time Grizzlies gig, but it certainly could help him be a long-term NBA player or a valuable enough commodity that Memphis could re-sign him, ship him out in a sign and trade. Maybe not that aggressive, but you're catching my drift. Same thing with Yuta Watanabe, who has a roughly $2.6 million player option for next season. If he picks that thing up and he can be an end-of-the-bench guy who can get some minutes, shoot some threes, make some shots, you want to see a larger sample size of him being able to do that in Grizzlies Beale Street Blue. You're not going to be able to see that if this team was competing night in and night out for the 2 seed in the Western Conference like they've been doing the past couple of years. So I'm not trying to say that the current state of things is better than what Memphis fans got to enjoy the last 2 years. That Grizzlies team over the last 2 seasons that secured the number 2 seed in back-to-back years, that team's beating the grit and grind Grizzlies in a series by 5. G&G next gen in 5 would be my prediction. And if you follow Locked On Grizzly, you follow my career, you know how much I love the grit and grind Grizzlies. Grizz next gen in 5. The talent disparity is that drastic. The ability for Memphis to play at a level that is so special when they're clicking and they're healthy. It's fun to see, but you're not getting a chance to watch Vince Williams Jr. play if this team was healthy. He's not getting the same opportunities. G.G. Jackson might still be in South Haven with the Memphis Hustle if Marcus Smart and Desmond Bane and all these other guys were able to log minutes. That's important to remember too. So the sunny side of this is they're racking up some losses, but they have found 2 guys in Vince Williams Jr. and G.G. Jackson who, at least for now, appear to be part of the core long term. They can be 8th, 9th, 10th men in a rotation. We talked yesterday about G.G. Jackson potentially being that microwave scorer off the bench. But if he's going to make mistakes, whether it's on the floor as a defensive rotation or off the floor in terms of breaking team rules, now's the time to do it, and now's the time to gain the wisdom that you can only get from failure. That's something to be excited about. Not as excited as competing for an NBA championship. But we're looking for the sunny side, the bright side of this situation. And there is a bright side, I promise. If you look hard enough, you see it. We can talk about Tankathon. That's more so for another episode. But I really want to, beyond lottery odds and ping pong balls and looking to talent that could be down the pike. Enjoy the now, as weird as that is to say, as long as they're competing and as long as they're growing. And as long as the guys that you need to grow for when this team is going to be good again, because they will be good again. The sun will shine on us again, dear listener, dear viewer. And when that time comes, you know you've got G.G. Jackson and you've got Vince Williams Jr., who can help that sun shine even brighter than it ever has before. You may not have had that chance if not for the current struggle. So find some opportunity to be optimistic today. It's going to be hard. These next 2 months are going to grind pretty difficultly. Difficultly? Is that a word? It's going to be pretty difficult over the next couple of months. But we can do it. We're going to get there together here on Locked On Grizzlies. Stay with me. Stay with Michael Cole. We're going to make it happen. Find the sunny side. There is such a thing, I promise. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. The next time that we're together, we'll be previewing Memphis's next contest, which will be against the Houston Rockets. Dylan Brooks popping back around. That'll be fun. Looking forward to Dylan being back in the house. I'm sure he'll have all sorts of fun things to say to Michael Cole and others. So we'll preview that game. We will look ahead to the Bucks game after that. We can talk Vince Williams Jr. a little bit more extensively. Maybe I can get to Michael's reaction to me being very pro Luke Kennard as opposed to his pro Steven Adams argument. We've already talked about that a little bit, but there's lots of different angles we can take. Again, Vince Williams Jr. is a rising star replacement. That makes sense to discuss tomorrow as well. So make sure you're with us on our Wednesday edition of the show. It's going to be a good one. Make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. You can also find it on Amazon Fire TV. Locked On Sports Today here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day. Local experts are Locked On, plus national shows covering every league. Again, find the Locked On Sports Today channel now on Amazon Fire TV. Thank you so much for checking out Locked On Grizzlies, a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. Hopefully you're an everydayer by this point. You get a notification. A new episode drops on YouTube, new podcast out on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Subscribe. Smash that button. Stick with us and make us a part of your NBA content consumption each and every day. Thank you so much for being with me on this episode. Until next time, stay locked in and keep looking for that sunny side. I promise it's there if you look hard enough in the clouds. Don't look into the sun, though. That'll hurt. Have a great day. Catch you next time on Locked On Grizzlies.